I'm truly amazed to see white people coming in defense of black people and what black people stand for and what actually is happening in South Africa, this whole thing of land redistribution and expropriation of land. Many white people are explaining this to their other racist whites. Many people are commenting from America, American white journalists about Alex John, about Elon Musk, commenting about misinformation, propaganda. So much for people who preach free speech and use their free speech to promote propaganda against South Africa. It's so bad. But at least there's white people who also defend us as black people. You don't have to be shouting so much, explaining what is happening in our country. Nakhona, they don't have a choice. Angithi bafuna indawo yokuhlala. So bazokhuluma because bancincisile lana. Bangazositshela nabo. I want you guys to listen to this white boy nyana. Listen to this.
Apartheid ended over 30 years ago, but South Africa is the most unequal country in the world to this date. Why is this? Now, there has been a rise of a black middle class in South Africa and also rich black people there. But this doesn't mean that the black population's life within South Africa, along with other groups that were oppressed under the apartheid regime, has actually improved that much. In many ways, life is very similar, it is very difficult, people live precariously, disease is very prevalent, and also the living standards are incredibly low. Explaining why this happened, you need to look back to the end of apartheid, and perhaps one of the most important things with regards to the end of apartheid are the concessions that the African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, made to the white minority. Perhaps the biggest of this was the enshrinement of private property as a fundamental human right in the constitution that came after the end of apartheid. The problem with the enshrinement of private property as a fundamental human right is that it meant that they never reflected on how the white minority had got the land that they had or any of the private property that they held, because ultimately it had on the whole come from the exploitation, subjugation and removal of black people from society. So 3.5 million people, according to the Surplus Peoples Project, between 1960 and 1982 were moved from the land that they had inhabited before in order to create tribal homelands or Bantustans where the groups in South Africa such as mixed race, Indians and black people lived throughout apartheid. They were not from these areas, they were just forcibly moved there, and it was never reflected on how much this meant or how these people would ever receive justice. Now, a good example of how this enshrinement of private property affects South Africans to this day can be seen in the township of Alexandra. Now, Andy Klano talks about this throughout his book, and this is not the only reason that the neoliberal projects that have sought to help the groups who were affected by apartheid in South Africa have not worked. But what he talks about in part is how white landowners who own considerable amounts of farmland near Alexandra are totally unwilling to sell it even to the government, except for incredibly exorbitant prices, because there is this system that is willing seller, willing buyer. So if someone is willing to sell something and a buyer is willing to buy it, they can take it from the white minority. However, unless they're willing to sell it, they don't have to give up their land. So Alexandra, a massively overpopulated township in South Africa, struggles, and even the projects that seek to help them struggle because they simply do not have the funds available to buy the land off the white farmers who just don't want to sell it. And here you can see how enshrining private property that was accumulated through the expulsion of the groups affected by apartheid is still a massive problem to this day, and one that requires a much bigger addressing than was offered in the 1990s. Now, one of the other things that was done to end apartheid that is often seen as a very fantastic, heroic thing was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, the TRC would offer the perpetrators of apartheid amnesty if they were willing to admit to their crimes so that victims could receive justice. Now, the TRC only got to around 20,000 claims, and the problem was that they only focused on violations of the bodily integrity of the people who suffered under apartheid. And what Mahmoud Mamdani highlights about this is that it completely ignores so many other things about apartheid that had nothing to do with bodily integrity. So this meant those 3.5 million people who were forcibly removed from their land and the people who accumulated land off the back of it would never see justice on either side, because ultimately their bodily integrity was not violated, so it didn't matter. Another good example of this were the millions of people who were affected by what are called pass laws. Now, pass laws were these things that were instituted that meant South Africans from the tribal homelands could not move freely, and if they were caught doing it, they would be arrested and forced to work on farmland. This was very important to the white minority in South Africa because it meant meant that they would have a cheap source of labour that was constantly produced by people being arrested under this pass law. There are many other things that were left by apartheid that I haven't spoken about in this video that define society now. One of these is things like tribal divisions that were mostly created by the apartheid regime in order to control the populations that were affected by it. So ultimately, apartheid is the reason that South Africa is in such a bad situation, and the unwillingness or the compromise of the ANC to the white population is what has defined it. Until South Africa reflects on how white people accumulated all of their land and find some way to help the populations that were massively affected by apartheid, all of their neoliberal projects that seek to do things in the here and now that alleviate small problems of the populations within the townships of South Africa are never going to fix anything or provide an improvement in the quality of life for South Africans.
Niyabona sibancengisile, they will do anything ukuthi bancenge and hang on and cling kulomhlaba lo abanawo manje, cause ngathi it's ringing in their hearts, it's ringing in their heads, the bell is ringing, killing killing, break time is over, we are almost going to after school, maybe kuzoba ne studies, they can see the studies coming and bayabona hey they might be not something that's gonna be something, make sure what if you get it, you get it. I'm not trying to say anything, by the way. You know, sometimes you have to speak like you're not speaking. But bayabona man labantu laba ukuthi ngathi izinto zizobajikela ngasikudala la eMzansi. So in order for bona ukuthi babe ne favor from the blacks, they will speak on behalf of us and clarify some things. They never used to do this before, by the way. But ngathi bayabona, hi, these people bakwatile. These people they are coming like all these political parties or representing black people, they are preaching the same thing. We want back the land. Ngathi bayabona, hey, this land thing is not going anywhere. They thought it was gonna go anywhere. It's not going anywhere. Manje bathi yazini, hi man, let's read up on this. Then their kids are reading up on this. This boy is reading, explaining to his parents, his racist parents, simplifying these things because bayabona, their parents, their grandparents, bozo vaya man, bozo shona ngasikudala, bozo sala nathi labafana laba, one on one. Hey, so bakhaba, yes, bangazositshela kabi lawo. So bayabona labantu laba ukuthi kwenzakalani. Niyangithola abantu abakithi, niyangithola black people, niyangizwa ukuthi ngithini. Bayabona labafana laba ukuthi hey abazali bethu bayenza inyinto la, bayenza inyakanyaka la, bozoshona kungasikudala labazali bethu, yithe sosala nalabantu and labantu bakwatile. So they how come you're not getting what I'm just joking. I know my brothers and sisters, my black people, not just in South Africa only, people of the world. We've been getting support from all over the world, by the way, and it was shocking to get majority of the support from America. Americans were fair too. Black Americans. They understand, they sympathize with what is happening here. Muslims who have always been supporting Palestine, they are supporting us with this whole thing of land. Bayasiza bafethu, they are understanding us. And ngathi labafana lawa labantwana laba belungu laba bayabona ukuthi hi man, labantu laba mnyama laba bamnyama ndawo ngathi they have a world favor man all over the globe. Ngathi abantu bayabathanda man labantu laba. Yazini, let's not mess with labantu laba. One day bozosifikela and bozosikhahlela bozosikhaba. Ngathi bayabona hayi ilanga lawo soon lingafika anytime with our Julius Malema ready like this, with all these political parties, MK party, abo Andile Mncitama nawo man, hey, but they are there speaking the same language. Like this thing is boiling so much. No, Ramaphosa couldn't help it but involve himself in this discussion. Bayabona labantu laba ukuthi umhlaba is gonna flash right before their eyes if they don't act like they like us. Many of them is disingenuous, but at least they are explaining, man, to their racist parents. But it is what it is. Thank you very much.